let's just say that I think for most of us, it's pretty far out there. And yet, I read that this was the most powerful spiritual experience of your life.
Certainly in the top spiritual experiences of my life. Yes.
What'd you do? What was it? Tell me the
Well,
story.
I participated in the Johns Hopkins psilocybin trial with religious professionals. So I'm one of a small group of people who have done that. I think they had roughly 25, and there was an NYU study, and I'm not sure the number of participants in it, but where they asked people who had a religious background to come and basically try the same psychedelic ingredient that's in magic mushrooms, and to have a trip experience and then be able to describe that. I think the intent was to try to see would religious professionals describe it as a mystical or spiritual experience.
You're listening to The Thinning. Let's see what opens up. Kerra, it is good to see you. How you doing?
Pretty good. It's good to see you too, Steve.
All right. First, I want to know how did I just want to get right into the history of things. How did we meet? Where did we? What's our common connection?
We met when I was a pastor in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and you overlapped there. And I think we had plenty of beers together at Buffalo Grill, mostly.
Buffalo
Um,
Grill, yeah.
as part of clergy gatherings and just caring for each other and being in ministry, and it was a good cohort of folks there that were trying to do good work.
And it's one of the few places in East Tennessee where clergy can get together over a beer, because the rest of East Tennessee is not so friendly toward even the mention of such things, I
Sure
think.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. Oak Ridge is a unique place. For me, it's where I was born and raised. It's everything. I came back there in 1998, I think, right as Bill Clinton was getting into big. Oh, it was 1999 as Bill Clinton was getting into big trouble, and I remember that as a hallmark of my entry point back into the community. But it's Oak Ridge is Oak Ridge. It's a town full of scientists. I mean, what was your experience at First Pres? How did you encounter that connection between faith and sciencey things and all of that?
Yes, I moved there in 2003 to be the pastor at First Presbyterian, and found that it was a congregation of very interesting people with a lot of scientific knowledge. So there were a number of folks who had, even some former Manhattan Project folks who were still there and retired, and had some stories they could tell and some stories they couldn't tell because a lot of their work was secret. And then there were a lot of physicists who thought about things deeply and talked a lot about quantum type things, which I think is piquing some interest in the area of science and religion overlap. But they also were very concrete thinkers, and they didn't want a lot of they wanted to know how to do their faith more than how to think about it sometimes, and how to be in the world. So we talked a lot more about action than we did about theology sometimes.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that sets Oak Ridge churches apart. They're not there's For some people, I think there's a sense that it's kind of this set of ideas. Faith is this big set of ideas, and then there are people who I know one guy that I can remember. I won't mention his name. He's gone on to the great beyond since I was there, but man, he was a physicist and he did not tolerate any stuff. He didn't want any empty ideas. And if you came to give a presentation at a Sunday school class, he was there and he was going to give it to you. He was gonna try to nail you to the wall because one, he had kind of an agenda. He wanted to disprove what he perceived to be silly ideas. But I really appreciated that because for me, it was, you can't, this is about life. It's not about big ideas. It's not about things to think about. It's about reality and trying to understand reality, trying to connect things that have happened to us that don't make sense, but should make sense somehow. And so what is it? Is that we did something, or we experienced something that was so far outside the box that we couldn't really connect it to any kind of explanation, or are our explanations just not good enough? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I always kind of, and I think that's where he was coming from too. I think he was always kind of wanting to push the envelope a little bit and make me think. Not, I was the kind of the quote authority figure in this congregation, and I think he wanted to make me think. He wanted to make me a better
Sure.
person, which
Sure.
I think is awesome. Anyway, you ran into people like that, I'm sure.
Sure. I mean, it was a place where people had experienced a lot of education, and and the very interesting edges were where there were people who knew a lot, but they also knew what they didn't know, of where there were mysteries even in the universe, and the people who could think about that, of like those edges of what's beyond us in the universe, or the ones who really were thinking about astrophysics and large scale models of things. That's where it got fun.
And I wasn't up to the challenge at the time. That's the fun thing. This whole curiosity for me has really just started in the last few years. So, but it's been really interesting going down these vast YouTube wormholes that I've been down in the last few years, just trying to like, oh wow, there actually is. See, okay, big confession. I I've never been much of a prayer guy.
Okay.
Okay. So I've never been a prayer guy. I've never been, because it didn't make sense to me. Didn't make sense. People, first of all, in church, I always felt like people were praying for stupid things.
That can happen.
Yeah. You don't pray you don't pray for about the big stuff, like things getting set right in the world. You pray about, oh, so-and-so's got, a hangnail that's really giving her a hard time. Aunt so-and-so's, ingrown toenail is
Mhm.
always my terrible, cynical kind of example that I give. But it was around things that I didn't feel like were huge. And it was like, okay, so that's, I guess, the best God can do is help us with our little inconveniences,
Mm.
medical problems. Mostly seems God has kind of a corner of the market in churches, and especially in Southern U.S. churches, around helping us with medical issues. And I was never
That's
really
what
quite
all the
satisfied
prayer.
with that.
That's what all the prayer requests are, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, acquaint some of us who are not familiar with that, and who are actually trying to decide right now if they want to listen to any more of this podcast. Help us understand what's going on there.
Yeah, I think sometimes in church we do limit. We have this idea that intercessory prayer, the prayers for the things in our lives, is the only way to pray. That you can only pray by asking for help with this medical condition, or even if you're celebrating a joy, you might thank God in some of those kinds of prayer requests. But we don't get into the down and dirty with God of what are we angry at God about? What are we um, you know feeling despair about in the world. But if you go into the Psalms in Scripture, they're full of that kind of language. It's not just about someone's ingrown toenail. It's about who does God favor and why, and when is God pissed off at us and why. So those questions do come up in big ways, and I think teaching people to pray in different ways, whether it's with silence, whether it's with anger, whether it's with action. Um, whether it's with listening for the synchronicities of the world, some of the things that you've talked about being interested in. That's where it gets really interesting. Of there's so many different ways of praying, and if you learn some of those, then you can open your mind to a lot of different ways that God engages the world, other than just was I healed from my affliction or not?
And so Tell me, let's go back like really, really far. Let's go back as far as you can remember. My sense is, and I may be wrong, but unlike myself, I think you are kind of a prayer person. I think spirituality has touched you, has interested you in the past. Where did that begin? Can you recall like where that journey started in your
I,
life?
I think it starts with curiosity and wonder. I don't think it starts necessarily with prayer. And I think for me, I can even go back to I was one of those kids that fell in love with the question why, which happens kind of around those toddler years of why does this happen? But I didn't quite stop. I never was discouraged off of that question. So if you keep asking, why is this happening in the world, or how does this work, or allowing yourself to have wonder in nature or with other, the instances of meeting other people. Why did somebody come into your life at this time but not another time? Or why did specific people land in certain ways, or ask you a question that made you really think deeply? So for me, prayer is that constant curiosity, and I think that's a spiritual gift that gets quashed a lot in the church, because the church doesn't really want curious people. The church wants obedient people most of the time. So I think cultivating that as a spiritual gift kind of puts you a little bit, askew with some of the church's teachings that value certainty more. I tend to value the questions more.
Interesting. Why the hell do churches want certainty? What's the impulse there in your opinion?
Certainty is predictable. Certainty also keeps people in the same in the same group. If you identify with certainty that you're a Presbyterian today, but then you start to question it and think you might be a Methodist or a Lutheran tomorrow, how do they keep you're behind in the seat and your money coming into the offering plate? It is kind of a practical business thing. You cultivate the people who are certain that they belong there, rather than looking at sort of the rough and tumble world of what it really means to create faith community, where there's a lot of questions and not everybody agrees on everything. And so it's that tightrope walk of how do we understand church? How do we understand spirituality? Are we in the business of preserving institutions or teaching people a way of life? All those things come up.
Our language says it's about teaching people about a way of life, but our reality, I think I would dare say, is more along the lines of keeping our aged buildings, keep the roof from leaking, and keeping the boiler going and things
Yep.
like that. And that's an interesting thing. I want to get into that more. But for you, so it started with curiosity. Is there an age that you can remember, kind of going, oh, wait a minute? I mean, and really starting to ask big questions, or was it just kind of part of your nature all along?
I think for me it was kind of all along. Some of it was you wonder at the natural world. I had a tree house that I hung out in as a kid. Um, you know, I for whatever reason I liked going to church and I liked listening to what was being said, and I would follow around the pastors and ask more questions. Which fortunately for me was welcome and not discouraged. So it gave me the opportunity to continue to open up that dialogue with the ministers who were part of my home church, and to continue um, just wondering, who are these people in the Bible? Why do they tend to be kind of, miscreant types that God keeps picking? And if you start following those narratives and go, okay, God seems to be working along the edges. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for me? I think that's where it got interesting, and I wanted to know more. So the spirituality kept developing. I would take more classes, and then took classes in college, and then took classes in seminary, and continued to want to learn and grow.
So there's also what I'm hearing also in your language. In church, we're very good at anthropomorphizing God, and giving God even, a gender, and certainly personifying or personalizing God and a relationship with God. And that, I think, is again another characteristic of specifically Southern religion, but really everywhere. Um, and I know that that's a really basic kind of driving force. It's a way that we construct our language around something that is kind of unknowable, but we got to know it somehow if we're going to talk about it, if we're going to communicate, connect with other people in our community, do all that growing stuff. But when did that start to bust open for you?
I'm not sure I can pinpoint an exact time, but I think that the deeper I got into Bible study and theological study, where you start to realize that, religion in the broader sense both has this sort of personified God, the God that is like human beings, and this sense of, the void or the mystery that is beyond anything that we can understand. And I find that concept incredibly intriguing. I think sometimes the Buddhists and the Eastern religions tend to do that side of God better than the Abrahamic traditions do. Because the Abrahamic traditions tie it into, this is the God of my people. This is the God of my ancestors. This is the God who we know personally through Jesus Christ. Instead of saying, okay, there's this, almost like the Star Wars God, the Star Wars force is out there too.
The force isn't very personal. You
And the
don't you
force
don't
is,
you don't
no,
name you don't put a name to the force other than just calling it the force,
yeah,
and it's not located anywhere, right?
right.
And that's a little different from, especially, the kind of the notions that we learn about God in Sunday school.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's an important concept to, bring into a sense of spirituality, because sometimes you need to hear sort of the Job's God, the voice from the whirlwind saying, it's time for you to shut up because you don't know everything about everything. And that sense of awe doesn't happen if you only have the sort of, it's me and Jesus kind of
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at things.
So we're gonna we're gonna fast forward a little bit,
Sure.
and we're gonna talk a little bit about something. And we haven't talked about this before. I've been watching the story of this unfold on social media to an extent, to whatever extent you can. You've been able to put it there, but I heard about something you did
Mm-hmm.
that is, let's just say that I think for most of us, it's pretty far out there. And yet, I read that this was the most powerful spiritual experience of your life.
It's
Is that
certainly
fair?
certainly in the top spiritual experiences of my life. Yes.
What'd you do? What was it? Tell me the
Well,
story.
I participated in the Johns Hopkins psilocybin trial with religious professionals. So I'm one of a small group of people who have done that. I think they had roughly 25, and there was an NYU study, and I'm not sure the number of participants in it, but where they asked people who had a religious background to come and basically try the same psychedelic ingredient that's in magic mushrooms, and to have a trip experience and then be able to describe that. I think the intent was to try to see, would religious professionals describe it as a mystical or spiritual experience. And I certainly came away from it with, it was exactly that. It was tremendously powerful. The study, as it was set up, had two trials, active trials with the drug that were a month apart. And my first experience was so incredibly just powerful and kind of unbelievable that I declined the second part of the trial because it felt like I was not ready to enter that journey once again. I question now if I would, I think there may come a time when I'm ready to take that kind of journey at a different stage of my life, but I wasn't ready a month after the first time.
Hold on. Wow. Because, that's not something I don't think I've ever heard anybody describe any kind of, medication related experience as in, oh my gosh, this was so big that I couldn't, I'm not ready for it. Help me unpack that. Help me understand that.
Um,
This wasn't just a feeling of, being woozy or having too much to drink. This was something that really opened you up in a way that was profound and what's the word? Disturbing? Is that a good word?
Disturbing is not the right word either. Profound is a closer word. You know, the way it timed out for me was I did Holy Week services in the congregation that I was serving at the time, and then that Monday I left for Baltimore, and Tuesday of the week after Easter was when I had the trip experience. So I was sort of in the Easter experience, the resurrection experience, all of that, um, as I took this journey. And the repeated pattern in Christianity of life, death, and renewal or resurrection that is a pattern kept repeating during my experience. So there was, a sense of that.
Yeah,
It,
stop just a second. I want
it,
to. I want to again. I want the listener to understand because we clergy can look at each other and we're like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's like that. But lay people maybe not so much. But within Christianity, there's always this kind of this cycle from birth to and then beyond. Can you please describe that if you would? I mean, what was it
sure.
like for you? What is that cycle like in your life, in your experience,
Um,
and why is it meaningful?
I think it's meaningful because it shows up as a repeating pattern in a lot of different ways. If you think about the seasons of the year, if you live in a climate that experiences all four seasons, you have that sense of the fall and the decay and winter and dying, and spring is sort of a renewal. And there's that same kind of pattern that happens in the passion narrative of Jesus. He's put on trial, he's executed, he goes through these really difficult times of giving of himself and experiencing great suffering, and that suffering becomes transformed and transformative for the person. And in the experience that I had at Johns Hopkins, I had like a spiraling set of that pattern repeating itself. And sometimes it was, a natural kind of pattern. I felt, I actually felt like I was a co-creator with God, giving birth to the world. I had an experience of feeling like I was dying in Mary's arms as if I were Jesus himself. I had these multiple experiences of that pattern affirming itself over and over again um, as if to tell me that suffering is a feature of our lives as human beings, but it's not wasted. It's part of the teaching of who we are as not just only human beings, but as spiritual beings.
So much to get to.
Yeah.
I want to slow down a little bit, kind of take
Sure.
this piece by piece, if possible. And I'm still interested in this whole. I don't think a lot of us, when we think of Christianity and the church, we don't really. I don't think a lot of us really think about it being. It's almost like this. Well, I love the idea from Eastern Orthodoxy, the icons. You don't
Mhm.
worship the icons, the old paintings where people look weird and they have the perspectives all backwards. You don't worship those. You worship through them. They're windows. You're
Mhm.
staring through the window, and this goes to I think it's in the book of Hebrews where Paul says, or the writer supposing to be Paul says something about it. Jesus is the icon of God, the image of God.
Mhm.
It's that we're looking through.
Hmm.
And I guess over time I've grown to understand all of those rituals of the year, the Christian year and the following of the seasons and everything, as this big huge window through which to look at, the seasons, the seasons of life, the things, the material things that happen to us. And now, I'm hearing you talk about something that happened in real time that was connected to that, but maybe not just in this kind of, again, I'm trying, and I'm Kara, I'm the stupidest guy on the planet. I can't articulate the kinds of this kind of stuff. I'm really not that smart. What I'm hearing though is that I'm hearing that, but magnified, and in the midst of a mystical experience that was brought about through a medication.
Yeah, and if you think about the most lucid dream you've ever had, it's it's as though the experience is that symbolic kind of looking through windows, and yet that reality, if a lucid dream feels like waking reality, then having an intense psilocybin experience feels more real than your waking life. Like it's as though you're looking at reality as the dream.
So it's like those dreams that I've had where, I have this recurring nightmare where I don't know why, but I'm in a conference, at a conference somewhere, and I'm either supposed to speak or I'm supposed to attend, and I'm wandering around. I can't find my room, and they feel so real, and I can't. And then I wake up and I realize, oh, that was just a dream. So you're saying this what you experienced was more real, and I'm trying to be a little flip here. Obviously my stupid recurring dream, they are power. I mean, I remember them,
Right,
and in the moment I'm thinking, I'm not really realizing that it's a dream. It feels
right,
very real.
right. And this is sort of the almost the opposite of that. It feels like you are understanding concepts of reality in a way that is more open than your regular waking life. And it's through these highly symbolic pictures of your life, images from, for me, it was very strong images of religion, and not just Christianity. It took other shapes and forms too. I had a um, intense experiences of emotion too, of anger and of grief, and tied to, oh my gosh, I understand how God feels anger. I understand how God feels grief for the world, because of this experience. It was that intense.
Were there were there were there understandings or images that came to you that were not familiar in any way? I mean, I'm thinking about religious imagery. So we're, again, as clergy, we're steeped in this story. We can spout off Bible verses that we didn't set out to remember or
Right.
memorize, but they're just boom, they're there. They're part of our consciousness. And were there anything? Did anything appear to you or come to you that was not familiar that way? Or
Yeah, there's a rubric in the study, that you're listening to music almost the whole time, and so there's a shift in the music from almost kind of a Western Christian canon of music to, and it shifts to, um, an Indian chanting music, and I definitely felt like I had this, you know, bull formed God of rage and connection and just intensity, and what the rage that leads to justice feels like. That was an image I didn't have in my own mind, and I think I ended up searching for that later and found, um, a number of Buddhist and Hindu archetypes that fit what was going on in my own mind and spirit. Shiva or Kali, or a sense of, how the gods can be completely angry and terrifying, and yet that's something we need to experience too.
I'm I've reached this point where now I am out of my own personal concepts. So I'm gonna have to go back to the only thing that I can that just keeps coming to my mind right here is again this idea of an icon, of an image that is, inert. And and how it can become this thing that we see truth through. We can't access the truth direct. Most of the time we can't access it directly. At least I think that's the way I've learned it. But there's an image, there's something that speaks it to us, and there's some images in the world that speak it better to us than others. Um help me out.
Uh,
Help me out. Where are
there's
we going here?
there was something, the study intentionally was high dose psilocybin, so it wasn't a you may or may not have this experience. It was here you go, you're invited on this bullet train to something completely different. And it actually, I think it felt more than just a window. It felt like a direct experience um, of the divine. I mean, I can think of other times in my life where I've had a spiritual moment that I felt like I was having direct communication with God, direct union with God, and this chemical and that feeling are very much intertwined.
And so back to the experience itself.
Mm-hmm.
You said you felt as though in one point you were giving birth with God. You were
Mm-hmm.
co-creating. One of the things I understand about this experience is that you can't really go back and it's kind of hard to remember. You have to jot some things down immediately afterwards, maybe, but some ideas may stick with you. Is there any way you can describe that to me?
I would say rather than not remembering, because I remember it clearly, it's describing it that's hard. It's
Sure.
putting it into to words. It's trying to f the ineffable, ineffable. So it's you're trying to get to that place where um, you can speak of what it was like. I mean, I could. I mean, I've got two children. I've given natural birth. I know what birth can feel like. It felt like labor, and it felt like creation, and I could feel the divine feminine presence with me and through me, and it was a sense that the world was coming out of this kind of creation. I mean, a very much a maternal, earthy um, kind of world, and it was beautiful, and it was frightening, and it was messy, and it was like, you know sweaty and physical. Like it was all of those things.
What else did you run across while you were there?
The oddest part of it, but also the very truest part of the Holy Week experience for me was in part of the experience you know I felt kind of like you feel very connected to your body, but also not very connected to your body. And I was not in a clear space of where my body was sort of in the room. And I got up on and then fell off the couch. Um, and when I did, I landed on the floor, and my two guides came over to kind of, make sure I was okay. And, the one who was, an old woman who was a little bit older than I am, sort of put her arm around me, and the image of Michelangelo's Pietà, the artwork of Jesus
Wow.
in Mary's, I literally was Jesus in Mary's arms, and it felt like
It's breathtaking.
breathtaking, and it was feeling all the suffering, all the hate of the world that comes to Jesus, and all the love that came from Mary, and that it was absolutely okay for me to die in that moment. Any fear that I've had about death has been changed by the experience. And I've heard, some of the other psilocybin studies are done with end of life patients, who are able to, sort of let go of some of the fear of having a terminal diagnosis. And I'm in my mid 50s, so I don't know if it'll last all the way to whenever my time comes.
Got to happen sometime, right? Yeah.
But yeah, but it certainly was this is just another window, another transformation, another portal. And all the love that we've experienced here continues, and the suffering that we experience here is transformed.
So I don't know if I'm ready yet to kind of get into the what does this all mean kind of thing, but what do you, I mean, as you've reflected on this, and how long ago did you do this? This was
It was 2019, so it was the
so
Easter of 2019. So it happened right before COVID.
Right. That's the marker. Some of us
Yeah, pre or post. Yeah.
Yeah, we used to think about was it before 9/11 or was it after 9/11? This is, pre-COVID, post-COVID. Wow. Okay. Kerra, you're a pastor and preacher, so I'm afraid you're going to have to try to put this into words. That's your job. It's your profession. Yeah, you have to do it. So I know you can. I'm being silly. But what is, I mean, were there any other characteristics that you would describe? So any more ways that you could take us along on the journey with you?
Something you may understand well is music feels different. And I think for musicians probably have a glimpse of it in ways that I, as a non-musician, don't understand. But like the way that music moves through your body, and you hear about that in people who have sacred music experiences together, that it becomes a whole body experience.
Well, mine wasn't sacred music. It was it was playing in a in a band that was with guys that I you probably know most of them from the Knoxville area, but guys that I played with since college, and we would go, do anybody would hire us, we go play, and we'd play for 4 hours straight with no breaks. And everybody in the band was better than me. And that's the way I like it. I like playing with people who bring me up. And yet, and I talked to one guy, well, it was Wendell, Wendell. And I told him, I said, Wendell, I've never done cocaine. However, I feel like playing with you guys is as close to cocaine as I can imagine. So that's my connection point. Yeah, music. It's and when you're clicking with other players, see, I'm sitting up on my seat here. I'm like, you can tell I'm really hyped about this idea. But yeah, you're clicking with other people, you're connected, you're speaking a language that's beyond there's no notes on the page anymore. It's happening. And I'm actually interviewing somebody for this podcast in a couple of weeks that plays she plays drums for a band, a Led Zeppelin cover band.
Okay.
And so we're going to talk, and she's a channeler, and we're going to talk about the way music is part of channeling something. And I'm really kind of interested to see what it's like to channel John Bonham. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah. Well, and kind of what I was getting at is that some of it, some of this kind of experience translates to other things. Like,
sure,
musicians sometimes feel it through music. I think that, a lot of people have had the experience of feeling at one with their community or with God. And that's very much a part of, or certainly was part of the experience with me. There's the experience of the profundity of God that is part of it. And I think those are all touch points that are are accessible outside of a psychedelic experience. I don't think somebody has to have one to have those kinds of connections. But it's a magnification of that, and it's a it's like I was belted into the roller coaster, and here was the ride. It was once the effects of you know the medicine take effect, you're kind of on that journey of learning. And those who have had a longer understanding of psychedelics will call psilocybin the teacher. That
Okay.
that it's that it more than other more than LSD, more than MDMA, has a sense of it's giving you something you need to learn and ponder on. And people talk about unpacking and integrating and understanding these spiritual experiences for a lifetime. Like it's when I talk about it, it's fresh to me again, even though it was 6 years ago, 7 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
There's a sense of um, it continuing to be meaningful.
And it was something so profound and so big that you didn't want to do the second round. Tell me about that.
Um, it, it took a lot out of me. I mean, physically, spiritually. When the experience was finished, the part of the rubrics or the study or what's called integration, being able to have somebody to talk to about the experience to sort of help you understand how it fits into your regular life and your regular world. And I felt like I needed to go beyond that. So I went to some of my, the people who taught me theology, who understood that language, and said, I need to talk to somebody because it feels like there's so many strands and I'm not sure how they work together now. So I was looking at putting that back together. I was having those kinds of deep conversations. Um, I was sharing it with some friends who had had experiences, so that I would understand myself better. And it just felt as though it was so intense that I was worried that I would go back in the second time more afraid. It was easier the first time not knowing what was
Right.
going to happen.
Yeah.
The second time it was, you know, I knew that the protocols were to potentially up the dose. And, I also was, that one of the health indicators for whether you should or shouldn't consider psychedelics is blood pressure, and mine tends to run a little bit high. It was medicated, but it started running high during you know, the event, and so just knowing that I didn't want to stress my body or my mind
Yeah.
further without understanding what I had already experienced first.
And so 6, 7 years later, I'm sure it's made some understandings different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's tweaked your theology, your ability to speak about big divine things. First of all, I mean, are people receptive to hearing about this?
Depends. Some are, some aren't. It changed how I preach. Um, to
Tell me
to
more about that because that's really interesting to me.
it mostly because it changed how I read scripture. Scripture feels different. Um, like I see things that you know, and multiple layers of meaning that whereas I was taught exegesis and you find the singular meaning of the text, and and this is what it's supposed. And now I have like tangents and ways of going, well, why is it said this way, and what if we followed this line of thinking? And people in my congregation started saying, wow, your sermons have really great these past couple of,
So
so
better, so they can sense an
better.
improvement, or they
uh,
can, or it's answering their questions better,
Better,
or
different, more profound. I mean, I didn't consider myself a bad preacher before, but it felt like they were feeling more connected to what was, what I was preaching. And I hadn't talked to them about the study. I mean, I wasn't sure at that point whether I was going to reveal more about that or not. So, at that point, they were just noticing something that I was noticing, how I was reading differently. Um, and then, in terms of receptivity, I think that, you know it depends, because as a spiritual director, it's opened up a lot of doors. I do that kind of work as well, and I'm now also a psychedelic informed spiritual director for Ligari.org, which is a Christian psychedelic society where folks can come to talk about the spirituality of their experiences in small group spiritual direction, or find other people to connect with.
so what is spiritual direction? What
Um,
is that?
Spiritual direction is, a partnership or a companionship of listening to somebody about their spiritual story, not necessarily about, their emotional story, but, how do they understand who God is, or their spiritual experiences. And, it's being trained to sit with somebody in those and sort of help if they're finding their experiences challenging, or to give people, thoughts about how to pray and some of those things too. So
How's it different from therapy, from pastoral counseling?
it's different from therapy or pastoral counseling in that, spiritual direction is always going to affirm that each person has their own path to walk with the divine, and, as long as, there's no that there's not an intent of harm, um, those all those paths are valid. In pastoral care, sometimes you're like nudging people back to their relationship with the church or a particular denomination or structure. Or in pastoral counseling, looking for the therapeutic view. How do you help heal somebody? This can be healing. This can be challenging. This can be, talking about the absence of God if somebody's frustrated about that. Talking about where they find God's presence. All of those things, and it's not like coaching either, where you're trying to get somebody to a particular point. It's really analyzing what's the relationship with God in the present.
Okay.
And when you add the psychedelic dimension of that, it's having been there, so, at least once, so that you understand when somebody's talking about, sort of opening up those doors of perception. You have at least a more experiential concept of what that can be, or potential for that.
How do you think people are responding to that these days? I mean, again, we're living in a time where the old forms and institutions have pretty much broken down completely. I would say that's my take on. I mean, I'm in a denomination where the denomination's just split, and there's hardly anything left. The institutional strength is just not what it was, and that makes us go back to a different set of questions than the ones that we had 40 years ago when we got into this stuff, especially when you were thinking about professional ministry as a career, which I think we could talk a lot about, how what's wrong with that idea, um, but how are how do you feel like people receive this now? Is it church people that come to you at Ligare, or is it
It,
people outside the church that are not at all interested in? I mean, what?
it's both. I feel like I kind of have a foot in both worlds. The Wild Goose Festival that's in North Carolina, some of, these kinds of big festivals of spirituality, robust conversation about psychedelics and mysticism. In that space, um, you know, they're bringing more spiritual leaders into conversations of psychedelics with, the organization's called MAPS, and I forget what the acronym exactly stands for, but, psychedelic studies are starting to ask these questions, and ask about people's experience. I think in the church, it's still, because it's illegal in most places.
Schedule 1? Yep.
It's still taboo, but,
Yeah.
there are states where it's either legal for medical use or decriminalized.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those aspects of the exposure to psychedelics is going to change. I mean, even if you think about ketamine clinics that are in a lot of places, some people are having spiritual experiences with ketamine, and because it, people walk out feeling different, um, you know, they may or may not get any follow up of, was there a spiritual tie to that? Was there an emotional tie to that? They may get some therapy, but are they getting a place to talk about any spiritual experiences that they have?
Yeah.
Um, the conversation's pretty wide open there, and as far as churches go, I think that there's, in a lot of traditional churches, there's not a whole lot of conversation happening, but if you open the door for it, someone might tell you about their Woodstock
Sure.
experience, or yeah, when I was, in college, here's what I did, or here's, I've always wanted to talk about it. Where, is there a place to talk about it? Um,
Well, we're going to go back to Oak Ridge now, and that is a metaphor for the cerebral life. The having to make sense of out of everything, and this is where I think I really have gotten. I remember being just really brutal to a friend of mine, and I apologize, out into the cosmos for this, but he was trying to he had actually made a Buddhist prayer room, sitting room in his home, and invited people over to sit. This is a point in time where I was going through a lot of personal stuff that I didn't even really understand, didn't know about, problems, my family falling apart, things like that. That I was trying to, anyway, long story. Um, and a lot of that energy was directed toward very outward kind of stuff. It's like, okay, I don't understand the prayer thing. I don't understand, God is the wish granting genie. And, that doesn't make any sense to me. Religion is huge for me. And it's because I connect so much with the first three gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the Jesus that is, shown in those three writings. And, and so for me at that time, it was like, well, I told him, I said, he invited me to come to his room and just sit. And I was like, I got no time for that shit, man. There's a world out there that's broken, and I got to do something about it. And, we could say, well, that was my own, projecting my own brokenness out into the world. It was, we can do all kinds of things, but let's be honest, the world is kind of messed up right now, and we need all the people we can do, all that we can to try to, heal that, make it better. And at that time, for me, it was, I got no time for this, woo woo stuff, because there's a broken world out there that definitely there's people losing their lives that are, well, what if, as we are starting to ponder now, what if going all the way back to the big stuff here, what if consciousness is the root, and all that we know in this world, in this life that we live, stems from consciousness? What if it's not the materialist kind of point of view that, well, our brains are these big computers, and they just got wired up just right, so boom. I've never been able to square with the idea that I somehow this interior life that I have is in these little. I look at the world through these eyes, like I'm looking out through these windows, these two eyes. How does that work? How does that work? I've always felt like consciousness, and our being was so much bigger, right? And so much more, and so much more than what could really be contained in these frail bodies that we have. Uh, I'm really kind of wondering, what have you thought about with the science? What have you, what conclusions have you come to in connecting the experience that you had, connected with the other spiritual experiences that you have had and sought throughout your life, and how it works, how it, what it says about consciousness, what it says about life after death, what it says about life during life. You know, what is what? Help me out.
Sure. You know, if you think about consciousness as the experience of being human, we all have some connection to it, whether we're um, whether we're learning and growing from it, or whether we're just sort of responding to it with the reptilian parts of our brain and just sort of going through it. There is that sense, that piece of what does it mean to be human, and I think that's one of those perennial questions. You're never going to stop asking the question, what does it mean to be human? But I think in terms of what you're looking at, you know, if we just sit around and contemplate our consciousness, or have these kinds of trip experiences or peak experiences, but nothing changes, then that's kind of bullshit too.
Mm.
You know, the goal, as I see it, is spiritual transformation. So if you're curious and you're awakening to new ideas, the truth of that comes that that it's an actual awakening when you're not just seeking the experience, but how does it change the action in your life? Richard Rohr, in his wisdom school, calls it the Center for Action and Contemplation, and says the most important word in that is "and." That we need those times to think about what does it mean to be human, because that can help us grow to the next level of how are we going to get past the racism and the hatred and the divisions in our world. We also have to come to an understanding that it's not just me that's human, it's you that's human, Steve, and it's everybody that's human. And if I don't care about those other people as anything but a statistic somewhere else, then I'm not going to get to the point where I'm fundamentally trying to help create a better world. But the action has to come from that, of how are we doing the tikkun olam in the world? How are we building for something better? How are we making a difference for our neighbor? Because Jesus took the time to pray alone in the wilderness, but then also came out and said, the most important thing is that you're loving God and loving your neighbor. How are we going to do that?
Well, there's also this famous passage that's abused by putting it in as a wedding scripture, which it's not. But 1 Corinthians 13, blah blah blah. I could do all this, but the greatest of these is love, love, and where I guess I'm really kind of wanting to be the detractor here and say, Kerra, okay, so you had a really cool experience. Now what? What does it mean? How has it changed your life? How does this kind of stuff? How does expanding our awareness and our consciousness? How does it? Can you? Is there a way to say that, to quantify it somehow? Because I think it's not really quantifiable, but help me out.
I think when I mentioned before that the feelings I felt were like deep rage, deep grief, like the kind of grief where I thought the tears were not going to stop. I thought I had empathy for my fellow human beings. That took it to a different level. So that when I would read passages of scripture that talk about, how God weeps with us, how God is, in the world with us, and dismayed when we turn against each other, I felt that.
Personalized it. You knew it.
Personalized it, knew it, felt it with a sense of God consciousness, so much so that, I can look and go, okay, I know that there are people in the world that kind of suck. And we're always going to have that. But they're human and God cares about everyone. And that's astonishing. And the rage of God cares about us continuing to follow in the path towards righteousness. And when we're not, it makes God angry. And and I felt that. And I think having that connection didn't really change my spirituality, but it certainly deepened it. And I think that can happen in meditation too. I think it can happen in prayer. I think it can happen in, doing a travel trip where you meet people that are different than you, or come to that awareness that somebody was operating out of a sense of not knowing, and you go, oh, it really wasn't that they were hateful towards me. They didn't understand how I might see things differently. So I think that part of contemplation or understanding our consciousness or reckoning with what it means to be human is part of the work.
Wow. There's a lot to think about here, Kara. I don't know if you noticed that. You wrote a book.
I did.
Yeah, I want you to tell me about your book, because there's a chapter in it about this
Mm-hmm.
specific thing, but there's more to the book than just this.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your book.
The book is called True Awakening: The Highs, Lows, and Mess of Spiritual Transformation. It's a reminder that spiritual transformation is a very human enterprise. It's not something that has, a particular set of steps, or, oh, follow this wellness plan and you're going to have, pop out a totally spiritually enlightened human being. It's messy, and there's parts of it that, sometimes you have that awesome high experience with God where you're like, I know that God is, and I know that God loves me and cares about this world, and it's amazing and wonderful. And then you have some of those times where you're like, oh my gosh, I have been the worst person ever. And John Calvin was really good at that. I'm lower than a worm. And those are spiritual experiences too, where it changes our hearts and we do something different. And it's messy, it's human. I talk about in the book, curiosity is sort of where I start, is that's the spiritual gift that kind of sets us on that path to wondering. And I think questioning is important, asking lots of questions, not being satisfied with certainty. And I do think that religion in a lot of ways has a lot of good toeholds. The tradition has depth and meaning, in a lot of places, sometimes in the obscure places where we haven't looked for a while, and reminding people who say that they're spiritual but not religious that religion has some good stuff in it too is important. And then also talking about the deconstruction movement and sometimes we have to really kick to the curb those practices and ways of doing religion that have hurt people. And that I'm in the same place with many of the people who have left the church, of feeling that the church has done some real disservice to how we understand who God is and who we are. And the chapter on my Johns Hopkins experience is on letting go, the idea of spiritual surrender. What does it mean to totally allow, the spiritual understanding, God's spirit, to wash over you and into you, and allow that? And there was no choice. Once you're on that train, it is going to happen in a way, and that every religion talks about spiritual surrender in one way or another.
Yeah, that's one thing you keep hearing over and over again is, that train, once you imbibe of the medicine, then the train leaves the station and
Yep.
you're on the journey and you're going. And
Uh-huh.
and that's a little different from most of the experiences that we have in spiritual practice, where we can stop it.
Right.
We can just say, nope, I'm done.
Yeah,
I've
you
I've
can
had
walk out
enough
on a
here.
sermon you don't
And you
like.
can, yeah, or you can, you can just kind of choose the blissful pieces of it, and ignore in seminary I read St. John of the Cross, The Dark Night of the Soul, and how he's like, oh, the newbies, the neophytes, they're like all about the bliss, and it's just when they get started, it's just, it's just all bliss, but then it suddenly turns dark, and because there's stuff to deal with, and then they all walk away,
Yeah.
and his thing was like, you're not even starting until it starts getting dark. You're not even getting a toehold in it yet. I
Yeah.
find that
There's
interesting.
there's a chapter on what it means to walk through that dark forest, and there's a lot of teachings to be learned there. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's where it gets meaty. And if you have a God that's only with you in the good times, that's not much of a God.
Well, How do we find your book? I'm going to put it in the show notes, but again, tell us the name of your book and how do we get in touch with other organizations that you are working with that you would like to share with us to brighten our lives in our world.
The book is called True Awakening: The Highs, Lows, and Mess of Spiritual Transformation. It's published by Orbis Books if you want to get it through the publisher. Or it's available on any number of your regular buy it online websites. The organization that I do spiritual direction with is called legare.org. And they have a membership program where you can learn more and connect with other people who are interested at the intersection of psychedelics and Christianity, or if they want to join a group for talking about it, whether they're integrating experiences or curious about what it can be like. There's a number of places to ask questions there. I think spiritual direction overall is important. I do some through Ligare. I do some through Spiritual Directors International or through Richmond Hill locally. So that's a way of having those kinds of spiritual conversations that aren't necessarily part of the church, but I think the church has resources. We need to remind them of that, and sometimes help them become a little more open in what they're willing to talk about.
Realize that, that hangnails and boo boos are not, it's not not the all to end all that we're really, I think we're, the more I think about it, the more I live. It seems to me that the Einstein moment, the simple equation E equals MC square, is actually the God is love
Mm-hmm.
stuff in in the epistles of John. God is love. Boom. That's it.
Yeah.
God, it's equal. So I mean, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, Kerra, thank you, and we'll connect again as this conversation grows.
Sounds great.